So today I'm going to make one of my all-time favorite traditional Belgian dishes. It's called stoofvlees or carbonade. I'm going to make some beef stew. And what you see in front of you, besides some water, is really all that I need to make this beef stew. So I have some stew meat, some cow here. I have some Belgian beer. I have a really nice mustard. I have an onion here that's been chopped. I have six cloves of garlic. I do have a little bit of beef bouillon. And then finally, this one's a little bit tricky. This is called bouquet garni. And basically, here in Belgium, we can buy this bouquet in any store that we want to. I'll try to give a list of the different herbs that are in here. Otherwise, you can use the same herbs dried. Things like bay leaves, thyme. I see some cilantro or some parsley in here, etc. In just a second, we'll get started with browning our meat first. All right, so I have emptied about 800 grams of stew meat into this bowl here. And all that I'm gonna do to this meat is I'm gonna coat it in a light dusting of flour. I'm gonna do this by starting with sprinkling flour onto the meat and then mixing it up. You can do this with a spoon, but I prefer to do it with my hands. Now, because I got a little cut on my finger earlier today, I'm using brand new clean kitchen gloves because I don't have any other gloves in the house to do this. And the meat kind of started out as one big chunk. I just want to let the flour help me to separate out the meat into smaller pieces, into the pieces that it came in. And we want to make sure that there's an even coating of flour on all sides of each piece of meat. So it should look, see, there's a big empty spot. We don't want that. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now, in just a second, we're going to turn around. I have a preheated soup pot with some olive oil in it, and we're going to use that to season the meat with salt and pepper, and then to brown the meat on all sides. So here we have our preheated soup pot, and I've got my meat right here next to me. And we're only going to be able to brown as much meat as will fit in the pot, so we're going to do it in batches. In other words, maybe 3, 4, 5 pieces of meat at a time, and we need to brown them well on both sides. That means dark brown. We're not cooking the meat all the way through. This pot should be medium to medium-high heat. All that we're doing is browning the meat because it will cook slowly later in our stew. The other thing we're going to do after we set in our first pieces of meat is we're going to sprinkle salt and pepper on them. Be very careful to let the meat sit for a bit because otherwise it will stick to the bottom of your pan. Let's check on our meat. So that is definitely, it's hard to see. Let me see if I can show that to you. Whoop, hello. This is not brown enough. We actually want it to be deeper than that. So we'll let these sit for another minute. Let's check again. That's looking a little bit better, so we'll go ahead and turn our meat over. Watch out for the oil splattering. This is why I wear a kitchen apron. So these 4 pieces look like they are just about finished. So we'll lift them out of the pot into a bowl. And we'll set these off to the side, and we're going to cook the rest of our meat in just that way. All right, so all of our meat has been browned, and we're just leaving that set aside here. You can now see kind of a steamy, smoky pan. I have turned the heat down on this because now we need to cook our onion, and we need to cool down the pan a bit and cook our garlic. So I'm going to start with the onion. Please be careful. The hot oil and a little bit of beef fat in here can splatter. We don't want to hurt ourselves. Make sure that you stir, otherwise this can burn. So we'll just come right over here because I can already see these browning more than I would like. It's going to be just fine, but this is a really hot pan. You also might notice some burnt bits at the bottom of your pan. That's no problem at all. We're going to get rid of those. And now that things have softened up a little bit, we can put in our garlic. Give that a stir. Because garlic cooks really fast, so we just want to be very careful with it. And now we're actually going to add an entire bottle of Belgian beer. nice and slowly, because it will bubble up and we don't want to have ourselves an accident. Now what's going to happen is the ingredients in the beer, really the alcohol, is going to help to get all of the burned bits off the bottom of your pan. And now would be a really good time to put your pan back on the heat if you moved it. So we've added our beer and we've put our pot back on the heat, which is a little bit below medium right now. We will need to boil this liquid, but first we're actually going to put in our beef bouillon cubes. I have 2 cubes here, but I'm going to start with 1. And the best way to do this is to break up the cube into smaller pieces and try to crumble that into your pot. It just helps it to dissolve a little bit more quickly. Now that's going to be really, really strong flavor, which is why we have some warm water. I've got a liter in this pitcher here. I don't think I will use the entire liter, but I'm not going to know how much water I need until I put my meat and my bouquet garni back into this pot. I am going to add my second bouillon cube. You don't have to add both. It really depends on what you like for flavor, but I know from making this recipe before that I really like to have both cubes in there. Now I can already hear that this wants to boil, which is a really good thing because we need it to. But in the meantime, I need to add my beef back to this pot, and that's going to tell me how much of my water I need to add. If your bowl has some of the beef fat or drippings, make sure that you empty that back into your soup pot because it's going to taste really nice. And with all of my beef added, you can see that it kind of pokes up out of the liquid. Our goal when we add water is to make sure that we can't see the meat poking up anymore. So I'd say I added about 750 or 800 milliliters of water. I added quite a bit. We're going to give that a little stir. And just based on what I'm seeing, I'm actually going to add the whole liter of water. All right, so I've given that a stir now. I'm going to take my bouquet garni, which I've tied together with some cooking twine, and boop, drop that in there. Just let him sink in and get comfortable. I'm going to bring this to a boil, and then I'm going to cover it up, and I'm just going to let it cook on low heat for as long as I possibly can. The more hours, the better. At least 2 hours is really important, otherwise you're going to have chewy beef. So I'll turn this up, and as soon as I start to see bubbles, I'll cover it, turn the heat all the way down, and let it cook for a few hours. We're about 1 hour, a little bit over 1 hour into cooking. And I'm just pausing long enough to take out most of my bouquet garni. Might shake a few of the onions out of there, because all the flavor of our delicious herbs is now in our soup. And we're going to continue to let this cook. I'll probably actually let it cook uncovered because I want it to thicken up a little bit. We're about 2 hours into our cooking time now. I have actually just turned up the heat a little bit to keep it bubbling, but I like to add my mustard now. It's my last ingredient. So I've got a little coffee spoon here, and I'm going to add about 3 coffee spoons full, heaping big coffee spoons full of my mustard into the stew. It has a while to cook still. Now, if you had to serve this stew right now, as long as your meat is nice and soft and cooked, you could serve this now. It would be very, very thin, so I'll show you a little trick. If you wanted to serve this stew now, you could sprinkle in something like this. This is a sort of a cornstarch express gravy mix that's specific for brown gravies, and that would help you to thicken up your soup right away. Because in my household, dinner's not for another few hours, I'm just going to let this cook on the stovetop and get thicker and thicker as it cooks. So here we are about 4 hours later, and you can see how much thicker it is, and actually how much lower it is in the pan. We started with our liquid near this bolt here, and it has dropped a couple of centimeters. Now, if this isn't thick enough for you, because oftentimes stoofvlees is quite thick, then again, You can add some of the brown sauce thickener. You could add cornstarch and water mixed together, and that would really quickly thicken this stew. I'll probably keep cooking it throughout the evening just because this isn't what we're having for dinner tonight. But basically, this is some finished stoofvlees. The only thing that you might need is a touch of salt or pepper, but that's entirely up to you. So, voila, stoofvlees. Enjoy.